Motorsport sells speed. It sells the roar of an engine at full throttle, the blur of color rounding a corner, the glory of a driver crossing a line first. What it does not advertise is how thin the gap is between that glory and catastrophe. A gap measured in inches of track width and fractions of a second most of us will never notice. Drivers know what they are signing up for. They read the risk into every contract, every helmet strap, every lap. But the marshal waving a flag on a live track did not always get that choice, and neither did the spectator behind the fence or the mechanic in the pit lane. This is not a story built for shock value. It is simply what happened, in order, as it happened. Here are 5 of the most disturbing racing deaths ever recorded. It is 5th of March 1977 at the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit near Johannesburg, South Africa, and the South African Grand Prix is 22 laps old. Tom Price, a 27-year-old Welshman driving for the Shadow team, is running in the midfield, threading through traffic on a fast, sun-baked afternoon. Kyalami's main straight is one of the quirks of the place. It climbs uphill for the first half, crests, then falls away downhill toward the first corner. A car coming over that crest at racing speed cannot see what is waiting on the far side until it is already there. On this lap, what is waiting is 2 men on foot crossing the track. The reason they are crossing goes back one corner. Renzo Zorzi, Price's own teammate, has coasted to a stop on the right side of the main straight with a fuel system failure, and his Shadow has caught fire. The flames are not large, and Zorzi is already climbing out unhurt, but 2 marshals stationed across the track see the fire and decide to help. One of them is 19-year-old Frederik Jansen van Vuren, known as Frikkie, a young man carrying a heavy fire extinguisher that weighs around 40 pounds. To reach the burning car, the 2 marshals have to run across the racing line in front of cars arriving over the crest at close to 170 miles an hour. The first car to reach them is Hans-Joachim Stuck's. Stuck sees the marshals at the last possible instant and swerves, missing them by a margin measured in feet. But Price is running directly behind Stuck in his slipstream, with his view of the crossing men blocked by the car ahead until it darts aside. By the time Stuck's car is out of the way, Van Vuren is directly in front of Price, and there is no time at all. Price's Shadow strikes the young marshal at unabated speed. Van Vuren is killed instantly. The fire extinguisher he is carrying is thrown upward and hits Price in the head with such force that he is killed where he sits, still strapped into a car that is now traveling at full speed with no one controlling it. What happens next is part of what makes this crash so hard to watch, and it was watched because cameras were rolling and the footage exists. Price's car, with its driver already gone, carries on down the straight in a nearly straight line, drifts across the track, and collides with the Ligier of Jacques Lafitte. Lafitte, remarkably, is unhurt. The Shadow finally comes to rest against the barriers. For long seconds, the scale of what has happened is not clear to anyone watching, only that 2 lives have ended in the space of a single corner. One of them a driver, and one of them a teenager who had come to the circuit to help keep other people safe. Price was not a marginal figure in the sport. He had been one of the most promising drivers of his generation, quick in the wet, quick on raw pace, and the only Welshman ever to win a Formula One race, taking the non-championship 1975 Race of Champions. He had put a Shadow on pole at the 1975 British Grand Prix. People inside the paddock talked about him as a future world champion. He was 27 years old. The race was not stopped. It ran to its finish, won by Niki Lauda, who later said there was no joy in the victory. The horror of the accident sat less in the speed or the impact than in its randomness. A driver killed not by a wall or a mistake of his own, but by a fire extinguisher carried by a marshal he never saw, on a stretch of track where the land itself hid the danger until it was too late. It forced an uncomfortable set of questions about marshal safety, about when and whether people on foot should ever cross a live circuit, and about how a sport could ask volunteers to stand that close to cars moving that fast. Those questions did not have clean answers, and in many ways they still do not. It is 30th of April 1994 at the Autodromo Enzo e Dino Ferrari in Imola, Italy, and final qualifying is underway for the San Marino Grand Prix. Roland Ratzenberger, an Austrian driver, is 33 years old and out on track in his Simtek S941. It is his third Formula One race weekend, and he has started exactly one Grand Prix, an 11th place finish at the Pacific Grand Prix a few weeks earlier. Ratzenberger had spent years grinding through junior formulas across Europe and Japan, funding much of his own way, taking rides other drivers passed on, waiting for a seat that most people in the paddock assumed would never come. Now it had come, with a small, newly formed team called Simtek, and he was out there trying to put together a lap fast enough to keep him in the field. Earlier in the session, his car had run wide over a curb at the Ac Minerali chicane, and something in that moment damaged the front wing. Ratzenberger stayed out rather than pit to have it checked. The wing held for a lap, flexing under aerodynamic load, and then, on a flat-out run down toward the corner called Villeneuve, it failed completely and lodged under the car. With the front wing gone, the Simtek lost its front downforce and its steering in an instant. The car did not turn. It ran dead straight at close to full speed into the concrete retaining wall on the outside of the corner. Data later put the impact at around 315 kilometers an hour, roughly 195 miles an hour. The injuries were not survivable. Ratzenberger suffered a basilar skull fracture, which was recorded as the official cause of death, along with a ruptured aorta and blunt trauma, as the front left tire was driven back into the survival cell. He was treated at the circuit and pronounced dead on arrival at Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. On the television feed and in the grandstands, the car sat still against the wall, and it took time for the meaning of that stillness to travel through the circuit. The reason the paddock was so unprepared ran deeper than one crash. It had been 12 years since a driver was killed at a Formula One race weekend. The last was Riccardo Paletti, who died at the start of the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix. And the last driver to die in a Formula One car of any kind had been Elio De Angelis in a testing accident in 1986. In the 8 years since, the sport had quietly convinced itself that the worst of the danger was behind it. The cars were stronger, the circuits were better, the medical response was faster. Ratzenberger's death ended that assumption in a matter of seconds, in front of people who had genuinely stopped expecting it. One of those people was Ayrton Senna. He had watched the crash from the pits, then made his way to the medical center. And what he learned there shook him in a way that people close to him noticed at once. Senna had lost peers to the sport before, but this landed differently. He borrowed a course car and had himself driven out to the corner to see where it had happened. Sid Watkins, the sport's chief medical officer and a friend, later wrote that he had urged Senna to walk away from racing altogether that weekend, and that Senna had answered that there were things he could not control, that he had to go on. That conversation took place the day before the race. Nobody standing in that medical center on Saturday could have known how unbearable the parallel was about to become. Ratzenberger is sometimes the forgotten name of that weekend, overshadowed by what came the following afternoon. Inside the sport, he is not forgotten at all. His death was the first crack in a long silence, the first sign that the danger the paddock believed it had engineered away had never actually left. It had simply been waiting. It is 1st May 1994 at Imola, one day after Roland Ratzenberger's death, and the San Marino Grand Prix is underway with Ayrton Senna on pole. He is driving the Williams FW16, a car he had privately told people close to him did not feel right, and by lap 7 he is leading the field, exactly where the paddock expected him to be. Ahead lies Tamburello, a flat-out left-hander taken without lifting, at speeds pushing past 300 kilometers an hour. It is not a corner where cars are supposed to go straight. On this lap, Senna's car does. It runs off the racing line, fails to turn through Tamburello, and continues on into the concrete wall on the outside of the corner. Telemetry later showed the car entered the corner at around 309 kilometers an hour and struck the barrier at roughly 201 kilometers an hour after he braked hard in the final moment. The impact was severe, but it was not the deceleration alone that killed him. As the car hit, the right front wheel and a piece of suspension attached to it were flung back toward the cockpit, and a jagged component pierced his helmet above the right eye. Senna did not move afterward. Professor Sid Watkins, the chief medical officer and the same friend who had spoken with him the day before, was at the car within moments. and what he found told him almost at once how serious it was. What exactly failed on the car, and why, became a question that Italian courts spent more than a decade trying to answer. Prosecutors argued that the steering column had been modified, weakened, and had cracked and given way under load. Williams maintained that the telemetry showed steering response right up to the impact. Frank Williams, the designer Adrian Newey, the technical director Patrick Head, and others were charged and tried. In 1997, they were acquitted, and an appeals court upheld the acquittals in 1999. Years later, in 2007, Italy's highest court concluded that a steering column failure had caused the crash, but by then the statute of limitations had expired, and no one was ever punished. The safe way to state it is the way the record leaves it. The case moved through hearings and appeals for years, and in the end no one served any penalty. What can be said plainly is that a piece of the car reached Senna's head at extraordinary speed, and the wound that followed was catastrophic. He was airlifted to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. Doctors worked on him, though by most accounts there was little real chance from the moment of impact. He was pronounced dead that evening. He was 34 years old, a 3-time world champion, and, to a great many people, the finest driver the sport had ever produced. The crash had gone out live to television audiences in dozens of countries, tens of millions of people watching a broadcast that was supposed to be about a motor race. In Brazil, the reaction was immediate and total. The government declared 3 days of national mourning. When his body came home, an estimated 3 million people lined the streets of Sao Paulo, filling the roads for miles to watch a fire truck carry him from the airport into the city. What followed inside the sport was a reckoning that had been overdue for years. Cars were slowed and their cockpit sides raised to better protect the driver's head. Runoff areas were widened at circuits that had gone unchanged for decades, and Tamburello itself was rebuilt into a slower chicane, so that a car leaving the track there would no longer meet a wall at full speed. The Grand Prix Drivers Association was revived to give drivers a collective voice on safety. There was a bitter irony under all of it. Only days before he died, Senna had agreed to help lead that revived association, worried by exactly the kind of danger that killed him. Ratzenberger's death the day before had shaken him badly. It fell to the drivers who outlived him to finish the work he had only just started. It is 16th of October 2011 at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and the IZOD IndyCar World Championship, the final race of the season, has just gone green. Dan Wheldon starts at the back of a 34-car field, 28th on the grid, and he is there on purpose. IndyCar had put up a $5 million prize for any driver who could start from the back and win, split between the driver and a randomly chosen fan, and Wheldon, without a full-time ride that season, had taken the challenge. The track is a high-banked mile-and-a-half oval, and the cars are running in a tight pack, nose to tail and side by side, at more than 220 miles an hour. Several drivers had said before the race that the combination of that many cars, that much banking, and that much speed felt dangerous. It took 11 laps to prove them right. Between turns 1 and 2 on lap 11, the pack caught up with itself. James Hinchcliffe was clipped. The contacts spread backward through the field in an instant, and cars began spinning and colliding in every direction. 15 of them were caught up in it. Wheldon, coming from behind at close to 224 miles an hour with almost nowhere to go, ran up onto the back of another car and was launched into the air. His car flew roughly 325 feet, spinning as it went, and came down into the steel catch fencing that lines the top of the banking. The cockpit struck a fence post. The post caught the lower right side of his helmet, and the injury it caused was not survivable. Wheldon was airlifted to University Medical Center. About 2 hours later, IndyCar's chief executive gathered the other drivers and told them he had died. He was 33 years old. The remaining drivers took to the track for a slow 5-lap salute, running 3 abreast while a recording of one of his songs played over the public address system, and the race was abandoned. It is one of the most wrenching scenes in modern American motorsport. Wheldon was not a journeyman. He was one of the defining IndyCar drivers of his era, a 2-time winner of the Indianapolis 500 in 2005 and again in 2011, and the 2005 Series champion. His second Indianapolis 500 win, just months before his death, had come when the leader crashed on the final corner of the final lap, and Wheldon swept past to take it. He had been helping develop the series' next car, a safer chassis that was already in the pipeline, when he entered the Las Vegas race. The response was swift and specific. 2 days after the crash, the manufacturer Dallara announced that the new car, already built with driver protection as a starting point, would be called the DW12 in his honor, the initials his own. The design pushed the rear wheels behind partial guards, intended to stop one car from riding up over another and being launched into the air the way Wheldon's had been. IndyCar did not race at Las Vegas again. The series stepped back hard from the kind of large-pack, high-banked oval racing that had produced a field of 34 cars running inches apart at those speeds, the very spectacle that had been sold as a selling point for that final race. The reforms could not change what the fence post had done. They were built so that the next car thrown into a catch fence at that speed would meet a barrier and a chassis designed to give the driver a chance the sport had not been able to give Wheldon. It is 5 October 2014 at the Suzuka circuit in Japan, lap 43 of the Japanese Grand Prix, and it has been raining for most of the afternoon. Typhoon Fanfone is moving toward the region, the light is fading early under the storm, and race control has been managing the conditions all day. A lap earlier, Adrian Sutil lost his Sauber on the standing water at the Dunlop curve, turn 7, and spun off into the runoff area. A recovery vehicle, a heavy-tracked crane, has been sent out to lift the wrecked Sauber away. Double-waved yellow flags are showing at that point on the track, the signal that tells drivers to slow substantially and be ready to stop. Jules Bianchi, a 25-year-old Frenchman driving for the Marussia team, comes through the same corner on the same water. He does not slow enough. His car aquaplanes off the track at almost the exact spot where Sutil had gone off, slides across the runoff, and goes into the recovery crane. The crane is a solid machine with no give in it at all, and it is the one kind of object a Formula One car is not built to survive hitting. The car struck it at around 126 kilometers an hour, a force beyond anything the survival cell was designed to absorb, and the worst of it was concentrated on Bianchi's head. The injury was a diffuse axonal injury, the kind caused when the brain is thrown violently enough inside the skull that nerve fibers tear across wide areas. Bianchi was cut from the car, treated at the scene and taken by ambulance, a journey of more than half an hour, to a hospital in Yokkaichi, where he underwent emergency surgery and was placed into an induced coma. He was later stable enough to be flown home to France, to a hospital in Nice, where his family could be near him. He never regained consciousness. 9 months after Suzuka, on 17th of July 2015, Jules Bianchi died. He was 25 years old. His death broke a silence the sport had come to take for granted. Bianchi was the first Formula One driver to die of injuries suffered in a Grand Prix since Ayrton Senna in 1994, a gap of 21 years that the sport had quietly treated as proof the danger had been engineered out. It had not been. It had only been managed well enough for long enough that people stopped expecting a reminder. The FIA convened an accident panel that included some of the most respected figures in the sport, among them Ross Brawn and the former champion Emerson Fittipaldi, and it produced a long and detailed report. The panel found no single cause. It concluded that Bianchi had not slowed sufficiently for the double yellow flags, and it also pointed to a set of surrounding factors: the conditions, the timing, and above all the presence of a heavy recovery vehicle on a live circuit while cars were still running at speed. That combination, more than any one decision, was what killed him. The finding that Bianchi himself had carried too much speed was painful for his family, who did not accept that their son should bear the weight of it. What the sport did next was concrete. It introduced the virtual safety car, a system that forces every car on track to slow to a fixed, controlled pace whenever marshals or recovery crews are working, without the disruption of deploying a full safety car. It tightened the rules on when and how recovery vehicles could be sent onto a live track, and Bianchi's racing number, 17, was retired from Formula One, the first time the sport had ever done that for a driver. The changes came as they so often do in this story, only after a driver was gone. Formula One, and motor racing more broadly, spent long stretches of its history believing it had solved this: better cars, better circuits, better protocols, and enough quiet years that a generation of drivers could come and go without seeing a fatality up close. Each of these deaths arrived as the same lesson relearned, always too late for the person who taught it. The gap between speed and control can be narrowed. It can be padded and flagged and engineered against with every tool the sport has, but it never closes all the way. It only waits.